Welcome to configuring and creating receipt write-offs in Receivables. We have two objectives for this course. Number one, to understand receipt write-off setups that are necessary to implement this feature. And number two, learning how to process manual and automatic receipt write-offs. First, an overview. What is a receipt write-off in Receivables? A receipt write-off is a receipt activity that cancels a small unapplied amount remaining on a receipt which your organization considers to be immaterial. In terms of the methods that are available to create these receipt write-offs, we have two. Number one, the manual method. That means that a write-off is created from the accounts receivables work area. You will navigate to this work area, look for a receipt, and then proceed to process a write-off. Number two is the automatic method. A write-off would be created by running the Create Automatic Receipt Write-Offs program, and then this program would automatically create the write-off, and of course it will look at the approval limits that are assigned to the user running the process. So we'll explore these two methods in more detail later in the course so that you are familiar with how to proceed in terms of creating a receipt write-off. Now, we would like to mention here that the receipt write-off functionality in Receivables supports multi-currency processing. So when you write off a foreign currency receipt, Receivables uses the conversion rate information from the original receipt for the write-off record. For scenarios when you adjust the conversion rate of a foreign currency receipt, Receivables will reverse the write-off with the original conversion rate and then apply the new conversion rate to the write-off. Now let's talk about configurations, and there are a few receipt write-off configurations that we want to discuss. Number one is the receivables activity. Of course, receivable activities are used in the receivables module for processing other than billing and customer payment. And so in this case, we will be processing write-offs, and receivables would need to know how to generate accounting distributions. In other words, how to generate accounting entries. And so that's why this configuration is important because when we define a receivables activity with the type of receipt write-off, Receivables, the application then would know which GL account to use to credit the receipt write-off amount. We also need approval limits. So users are going to be assigned approval limits in order to process receipt write-offs. What this means is that there's going to be a minimum and maximum approval amount that users can be provisioned with so that they can process receipt write-offs accordingly. Now these limits are going to be specific to a currency as well. Now we also have the receivables system options, and in the receivable system options we are going to be defining settings that are going to be specific to a business unit. So there we would need to define write-off limit ranges per receipt, and receipt balances that are less or greater than this range will not be written off. And of course we're going to take a look at these configurations and then proceed to do a demo later on in the course so that you'll get to see how all of these configurations come into play. Now let's take a look at these configurations in the Functional Setup Manager. So I'm going to navigate to the application. And so here I go to Setup Maintenance and look for the Financials Offering and the Receivables functional area. To the right I see a number of implementation tasks. And so here's the one that I want to look at first: Manage Receivables Activities. Now these are specific to a business unit, so I'm going to select a sample business unit, and I'm going to look for the activity type, receipt write-off, and let's see what I can find. So I'm going to click on search. And I can see this one here, receipt write-off, is the name. So here we see the GL account that Receivables is going to use to credit the receipt write-off amount. Okay, so that's going to be the GL account that's going to be used to generate accounting distributions. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel. Cancel again. The next thing we want to take a look at is the approval limits configuration, so which happens to be right below receivable activity. So I'm going to click on manage approval limits so that I can take a look at this implementation task. Now I'm going to look at the user that you see here, this user FAS01. I want to see what are the limits that have been configured for this user account. Go ahead and search. And of course, there are two different document types in here. Adjustment, which is a different feature in receivables, and the receipt write-off feature. So for this particular document type, the approval limits for user FAS01 are basically 1 cent to $20. Anything outside of that range is not going to be something that this user will be able to process. So this user will be able to, in other words, process receipt write-offs that fall in this range. Now let's take a look at system options. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel here. And at the bottom of the list here, we find Manage Receivable System Options. Now here, what we want to do is go to the Cash Processing tab. Okay, again, these are settings and options for a business unit. Okay, so if we look to the right towards the top, we see a range from write-off limit per receipt to write-off limit per receipt. And here the range is larger than we saw for that user. So if we compare this range, here we go from 1 cent to $25. The approval limits for user FAS01 were 1 cent to $20. I'll go ahead and return to the presentation now. So there are additional considerations that we want to discuss here, and they have to do with the lockbox functionality. After lockbox processes and applies receipts, the auto-apply process uses the application exception rule set to determine how to manage over and under payments. If there is an overpayment, the application exception rule indicates whether to refund the amount to the customer, place the amount on account, write off the amount, or leave the amount unapplied. Now here we can see a picture of this configuration, the receipt application exception rule configuration, and to get here from the functional setup manager, you would navigate to manage receipt application exception rules. Now the idea here with this configuration is to manage remaining amounts after lockbox has run. An additional option here is to require user review, as you can see. So maybe there are certain overpayments that your organization considers to be immaterial, and you decide that you want to write them off. But you might decide that you want users to review the write-off before it is final. So there's an option to do that here. If you look at this box, user review required. So it will be important to discuss this functionality and set up these rules in a way that conform to your business requirements. So let's talk about the Create Automatic Receipt Write-Off program. This program will write off unapplied amounts and close receipts. Now, it'll do that by, of course, looking at the approval limits of the user who's running the process. In addition to that, this program is going to look at the write-off limit ranges that have been established in the system options configuration. Now here you can see that there are a number of options provided. You can run this process to write off certain unapplied amounts or percentages, and this is a process that can be scheduled periodically to generate you basically receipt adjustments for small remaining balances. You also have the ability here to create write-offs for specific currencies and customers. You also have the option to run this process to generate a report. In other words, you can run this process in draft mode to see what the adjustments would be if the process ran in final mode. So it generates a report that you can review, and then you can turn around and run the process again in final mode. When the process is run, of course, you can pick a receivable activity that can be used to generate accounting distributions and credit the write-off amounts. We are ready to proceed to the instructor demo. And so what I will demo here is to first create a manual receipt write-off, and then I will proceed to run the automatic receipt write-offs program with the option to generate report only so that we can preview potential receipt write-offs. All right, so I'm going to go to the application now. And so I'll navigate to Receivables, Accounts Receivables. This is the work area for the Receivables module where I can create receipts, apply receipts, and then also write off receipts. So I'm going to go to the Tasks panel and select Manage Receipts. So here I'm looking for a receipt with a small unapplied amount. So let's see here. I'll go ahead and run a quick search. All right, there we go. So I have this receipt CR5002, and we can see here that the entered amount of the receipt is $11,719, and that there is an unapplied amount remaining on the receipt of $4. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the receipt number link, and of course at the top I see the header information here for this receipt, the receipt number, the business unit, and the customer information. So I'm going to go down to the receipt details section, and here I can see the receipt application against this transaction 29777. So here I'm going to go to Actions, More, Create Write-Off, and the $4, which is the unapplied amount at this point, is what defaults here in the write-off amount field. Of course, I can override this to something smaller than $4 if I want to. So, but I'm going to go with the default amount. I want to write off these $4. So here I'm going to pick the receivables activity and then click OK. So then the next thing here that I would have to do would be to save. And that's all it takes to create a manual receipt write-off. If we look here at the unapplied amount, it is now 0. I'm going to go ahead and cancel here and click on Done. And the next thing I want to show you is how to run the automatic receipt write-off process. So I'm going to go to Tools, Schedule Processes, Schedule New Process, and here I'm looking for the option to search. And so we're looking for Create Automatic Receipt Write-Off. Okay, here it is. So I'm going to select the process we can see here that this process will write off on applied amounts and close receipts. Of course, it's going to look at the approval limits of the user running the process, and it will look also at the system option amount ranges, the amount ranges that have been populated in the receivable system options. And depending on the amount of the write-offs, then it's going to go ahead and proceed to create the write-off if it falls within those amounts, those tolerances that have been defined in system options, and also the actual approval limits for the user in question. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. So there are some important parameters that we would like to highlight. We have business unit here, which is mandatory, receipt currency, which is also mandatory, and then a number of optional parameters such as the unapplied amount or percentage, receipt date. You can input ranges there. You can potentially run this process for a specific customer or receipt. And then the options to generate a report only so that you can preview potential write-offs, and the option to run the process to actually create the write-off. So what I'm going to do here in my demo is to generate the report only to view those potential write-offs. If I wanted to proceed and create the the write-offs, then I would go back and run the process again with the option to create them. Right, so then I'm going to populate the customer. So I just want to run this process for a single customer per Polyguana. And I have to populate my application date and my accounting date. So I think I have all I need, so I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. Here's the process ID. It tells us that the process has been submitted. So what we want to do next is refresh. So here we want to monitor this process and wait until we see the status succeeded. Now we can see here that the automatic receipt process ran in report only mode. So we see the status succeeded. Here's the report that will allow us to preview these potential write-offs. So here's the output. I'm going to click on this link, and what we will do here is download the report so that it will be easier to view. Here's the report, and we can see here that for this customer and this particular receipt number CR5003, there is a potential write-off amount of $5.08. Okay, so this report is very, very helpful. Now I can go to the application to confirm this if I want to. So we can go and take a look at that receipt right now. So let's go to the application. So I'm going to navigate back to Receivables, Account Receivables, work area. And we're looking for receipt number CR5003. And here, of course, I can click on the receipt, and effectively we can see here that the unapplied amount is $5.08. Now, of course, if I wanted to create the write-off after reviewing the report, then I would go here to schedule new process. So I would repeat the steps, but this time I would go with the option create write-off. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel and return to the PowerPoint. Now we've discussed a number of topics for this course. We initially discussed what a receipt write-off is in receivables. Is basically an activity that cancels a small unapplied amount remaining on a receipt. We've discussed the fact that you have two options to create manual or automatic write-offs. We discussed the different configurations, receivable activities, approval limits, and receivables system options. And we also discussed the relationship between lockbox processing and receipt write-off processing. And in the demos, we show you how to process both manual and automatic receipt write-offs. So with this, we have concluded configuring and creating receipt write-offs in receivables.